this evening's session at the Financial Times Future of the Car Summit 2022. We're very glad you can be with us, whether you're here in the room in central London or joining us on our global live stream. My name is Peter Campbell. I'm the Global Motor Industry Correspondent at the FT, and it is a great pleasure to introduce and chair this session for you. Let me tell you how this is going to work. In a few minutes, we're going to have JB Straubel back on stage and Elon Musk joining us remotely. We're just going to spend the first 10 to 15 minutes of the session talking about the history of Tesla. Now, these two guys were central to the company and its growth and everything it has achieved to date, and they have never before appeared on stage together to talk about the origins of the business. So this is a unique chance to ask them about that and hear about that. And then for the rest of the session, we're going to have time just with Elon on his own, where we'll have questions about Tesla today and tomorrow, and maybe one or two questions about some other projects he has going on. Just a reminder to you, please do ask your questions on the chat box, or if you're in the room, using Slido. But with no further ado, because of all our guests, here's the one who needs least introduction. I'd like you to welcome back to the stage JB Straubel, and joining us remotely, Elon Musk. Good evening. Thank you so much for being with us, both of you. I want to go back to something that was alluded to earlier in the session, and the lunch that changed the world, as Patrick called it, when the two of you sat down and came up with a plan that led to Tesla. Take us through that. Who started it? Whose idea was the lunch? Where did it go? Elon, we'd love you to start.
Sure. Well, actually, and JB, completely, I think it'd be good to hear JB's perspective as well. Yeah, I got a call, somewhat out of the blue, from JB and Rosen, and I think I'm not sure exactly what the subject matter was, but it's something involving space or maybe hydrogen airplanes or something, and so we got together for lunch, and at some point the conversation turned to electric vehicles, and JB and Rosen had both worked on an electric vehicle company that I guess ultimately wasn't successful, and I mentioned that I'd actually had a strong interest in electric vehicles for a long time, and I thought electric vehicles were the future of transport, and in fact I had worked at a company developing high energy density capacitors, ultracapacitors for potential use in electric vehicles, and that was going to be my area of study during graduate studies at Stanford, which I ultimately dropped out of. But anyway, that led to JB suggesting that I get a test drive in the T0 prototype from AC Propulsion, which is a small company in Southern California, and because that sort of had a proof of concept electric sports car, and I said that would be great. I'd love to get a test drive, and that was in 2003, and then I got a test drive in the T0, and I tried to convince them to commercialize the T0. I tried very hard actually to get AC Propulsion to commercialize the T0 electric sports car, and then after they said they really did not want to do that. I said, well, do you mind if then I do that? Do you mind if I create a commercial electric sports car? And they said, yeah, no problem. And so my intent was to basically then create a company to commercialize the T0 with JB, and then Tom Gage at AC Propulsion said, well, there's some other groups that also want to commercialize the T0 concept, and what do you think about teaming up with them? And one of the groups that was introduced to me was Mark Tarpenning, Ian Wright, and Martin Everhard. But it's very important to emphasize that there was no actual company that existed in any meaningful form at that point. So it was really just three guys, and then JB and me, and then we decided to team up and create and commercialize, create a commercial version of the T0 electric sports car. Yeah, I mean, JB, what's your perspective?
No, that's a pretty close history of how I remember it as well. I mean, my perspective on the thing was us trying to chat with you about this electric hydrogen airplane concept that we were, I was at the time trying to work on, and I do recall that not going extremely well, actually, for the first part of the lunch. I think, can't remember the colorful adjectives you used, but they weren't very, you weren't very excited about the hydrogen airplane, for good reason. So yeah, then I think our topics, our conversation completely turned to talking about lithium-ion batteries, state of the art of lithium-ion batteries and what was possible, potentially possible, stringing together, at the time, large numbers of small lithium-ion batteries, which were, not very mature in those days, but could be potentially connected into really big battery packs to make an EV that could potentially have hundreds of miles of range, which today seems kind of, commonplace, but in 2003 was absolutely unheard of. It would literally set world records, for range. Yeah, I mean, you understood that concept, I think, and the potential of it better than anyone else that we'd ever talked to about it, and were immediately enthused about it and excited. So that was, I mean, shortly after, as you said, we met up with AC Propulsion and kind of were off to the races.
And there were a lot of early rejections when you talked to some car makers. Obviously, you settled on Lotus for the first Roadster, but you went around some others. Was there ever a point, between the lunch and getting the Roadster off the ground where you almost gave up? You thought that actually you couldn't make it work, not from a chemistry point of view, but commercially?
Yeah, I can jump in maybe first on that. There were a lot of challenges in those early days. I mean, the technology was not... it was not a sure thing that all those pieces would work together, and some of the safety aspects around the battery were pretty thorny in the early days, and it was before I think most people had figured out how to manage that, and I think at Tesla I think we had an early chance to really figure that out in a very robust way and make them far safer than internal combustion actually, as proved out to be through the statistics and through data. But that was not the common perception, so that was hard and that was risky. Obviously, there were a lot of financial turns and tribulations. It wasn't exactly smooth sailing from idea of an electric roadster through into commercialization.
It was an insane nightmare, basically, and we screwed the pooch six ways to Sunday and made so many mistakes. It's embarrassing. Basically, almost everything about the first design of the Tesla Roadster was wrong and wouldn't work. We didn't. First of all, we had no idea how to build a car. And then no one really knew how to build a commercial lithium-ion battery car. No one had ever done it. So like the original idea sort of, which sounds appealing, but was fundamentally flawed, was to use the Lotus Elise chassis and then combine that with AC Propulsion's drivetrain technology. And boom, you've got, like, in theory, the two pieces necessary to create a car. It should be straightforward and just do that and great. Unfortunately, those were two fundamentally flawed premises. The Lotus Elise chassis did not work, meaning that the car ended up being 40% heavier, and we couldn't fit the battery pack in the Elise because it's a very tiny car. So we had to change basically everything about the Elise. I think we kept maybe 6% of the parts were in common. All crash tests were invalidated. The structure was invalidated because of the greater mass and the mass distribution being fundamentally different from a gasoline car. And in retrospect, it would have actually been much smarter to start with a clean sheet design and not try to modify the Elise. because we ended up with a lot of the limitations of the Elise, but almost nothing to gain in terms of reuse of parts. So that was a staggeringly dumb decision. And then on the drivetrain side, it turned out that I think almost none of the AC propulsion technologies were viable in a production car. I mean, JB, did we end up using any of the AC propulsion stuff?
I think pretty much nothing by the time it went to the first customer.
Yes.
It was a very helpful first proof of concept that maybe pointed the way that was what might be possible, but none of it was. I mean, the commercializing all of it, as Elon said, was a lot of mistakes and trials and tribulations, and it was very hard to build more than 2 of those motor controllers in the first days with analog components. Those were still analog motor control. I mean, it would get hot and the motor would perform differently. You know, the throttle would respond differently in a hot day versus a cold day. So yeah, everything pretty much had to be redone from scratch.
But presumably it would have been impossible. So go on.
So what we're saying is that we were huge idiots and we're totally wrong about the fundamental premises of creating the Tesla Roadster. And ended up not being able to use any of the AC propulsion drivetrain technology, using essentially almost none of the original Lotus Elise, but we're still left with a lot of the limitations of the Elise being a car that was a bit too small, very difficult to get in and out of, and very bare bones. And then dependent on Lotus to make it, and then every time Lotus would have financial difficulties, they would increase the price on us and charge us more money. So that made it very difficult to control the price of the car. And then the supply chain was also a complete mess. The initial idea was to basically outsource everything, and then almost none of the companies to which we outsourced the various parts of the cars were able to succeed in making those parts. So we had to find a new supplier for the car body, because the supplier originally picked was flat out unable to do it. This was not a decision that I was involved in, but we had outsourced making the battery to a barbecue company in Thailand. This is a bit silly to say, okay, we're going to make the most sophisticated battery ever made, and a barbecue company is going to make it. Obviously, they did not know how to make the world's most advanced battery. That was pretty silly. So we had to insource battery production to California. We basically ended up making the battery ourselves. Yeah, it's one thing after another, basically. Just a flat-out burning dumpster fire of stupidity, I would say, was the beginning of the company. And then we had to recover from there, and it was very difficult.
So there are lots of other EV startups out there, potentially in the hundreds today, all wanting to do what you did. You guys, you blazed the trail 10 years before the industry really caught up with you. You had the advantage of having no one else playing in the same area, but the disadvantage that all the time you were trying to break through virgin snow. Was it more difficult to do it 10 years ago than you think it is today? And if there's one piece of advice that you could offer to the various EV startups, what would it be?
Well, I mean, I think most of them just completely forget about the first 8 to 10 years of Tesla. That's the kind of amazing part to me. You know, they kind of see success, and then they're like, oh, that looks good. Let's do that. Let's be one. Let's do, copy that. But I mean, it was brutal confusion and tons of mistakes and a lot of money invested for a lot of years. I personally think it's a lot actually harder today, even still, for a startup to compete, because the first question is sort of what is the niche that even makes sense to have a new startup EV company relative to all the products from other OEMs or to Tesla? What are they going to do better than Tesla? Tesla didn't exist. There was no Tesla in the world 17 years ago. So that was sort of the imperative and gave a runway to make a lot of mistakes and still make it work.
Elon, what would your perspective?
I think just very, very important to emphasize here I think neither JB, well, certainly I wouldn't, probably not JB, would have wanted to go through the extreme pain of creating an electric car company if the traditional automakers were going to make electric cars. And it's just an important thing for the world that needs to happen to move to a sustainable technology future. And but if at the time that we created Tesla, there were no startups doing electric cars, and the big car companies had really no electric car programs going, and the few tiny electric car programs they had going, they were shutting down. So therefore, unless we tried to create an electric car, there was not one going to be created. It's not from the standpoint of thinking, hey, here's a super lucrative idea, let's start a car company. The history of car company startups is horrific. They've almost all gone bankrupt. It's an incredibly big graveyard of car startups that all died. You've only heard of a tiny number of them, sort of the Tuckers and DeLoreans of the world, but there are hundreds of others that people didn't hear about. At this point in the United States, the only two American car companies that have not gone bankrupt are Ford and Tesla. And Tesla almost went bankrupt so many times I lost count. So basically, it's a world of hurt. To start a car company is mega pain. It is not easy money. It's the furthest thing from easy money you could possibly imagine. And what I see with some of these new car companies is that they're jumping in at the deep end and trying to create a high volume vehicle when they've never made a vehicle before. This is not practicing your athletic sport and then going to the Olympics. You're not going to win. This is crazy. You really need to start out small, make your mistakes at a small scale, and make sure you've got a lot of reserve capital, and then gradually build up from the dumb things that you do at the beginning and be less dumb over time. Otherwise, what will happen is vast losses of money. The car industry is very competitive. It's the opposite of a natural monopoly. You have sort of natural monopolies in things like social media or, say, Google search. But car companies are naturally not monopolies. They're hyper-competitive, and they're used to being hyper-competitive throughout the world. They have entrenched customers, dealers, service, factories, existing expertise. These are veteran armies, like in fortresses. It's extremely difficult.
Now, you happen to mention in that answer the word social media, which brings us very neatly onto the question of Twitter. So, JB, I'm going to say thank you so much. That was fascinating, brief history there of Tesla and the early years and the mistakes that you made. So thank you very much for being with us on stage. Thank you.
Well, on the Twitter front, there's not a lot that I can say because this is Twitter's a publicly traded company, and there are a lot of constraints in what I can say. So, I'm not sure what you would like to ask, but most of the questions, the answer is going to be no comment.
That's all right. I can have a go. Let me ask you to put your product development hat on, and if you pair Twitter all the way back, what is it? And what do you think it can be in 10 years' time?
Well, what I've said is that I think Twitter is currently the best, or looked at another way, the least bad public square. A forum for the exchange of ideas nationally and internationally, but I think it could be a lot better at that. In order to be better at that, it needs to really get rid of the the bots and the scams and spammers and basically and anyone trying to create sort of fake influence on the site by where it's one person or one entity operating 100,000 accounts, or obviously scammers are not good, and Twitter really needs to do a much better job at that. It also needs to build more trust with users. I think the way to do that is by open sourcing the algorithm so everyone can see how the algorithm works and can suggest improvements and changes. I would literally just put the Twitter algorithm on GitHub and say like, hey, anyone want to suggest changes to this? Please go ahead. And just you really want transparency to build trust. And then any sort of adjustments to tweets or any human intervention with any account on Twitter should be highlighted as a Twitter person took the following action with your account or with this tweet, so that you're not sort of sitting there in the dark wondering, why did this tweet not get any attention, or why did this one get a lot of attention? It's far too random. And then I think Twitter needs to be much more even-handed. It currently has a strong left bias because it's based in San Francisco. I don't think the people there necessarily intend, or at least perhaps some of them don't intend, to have a left bias. They just, from their perspective, it seems moderate, but they're just coming at it from an environment that is very far left. So. But then this fails to build trust in the rest of the United States and also perhaps in other parts of the world, because Twitter needs to be even-handed and be, I think I said publicly, victory would be that the most far right 10% and the most far left 10% are equally upset. I don't think this is a situation where you're going to get necessarily a lot of praise. you're just gonna balance the anger.
So how do you? Because people will automatically associate you with Tesla and you with Twitter. Is there any risk in your mind that the actions that you're going to take at Twitter, which you've admitted freely will upset some people, potentially lead to a commercial impact on Tesla?
I'm confident that we will be able to sell all the cars we can make. I mean, currently the lead time for ordering a Tesla is ridiculously long. So our issue is not demand, it is production.
But that's at the moment because of the global supply chains and the chip shortages. That's less around electric car demand, which we are expecting to go absolutely through the roof. And you obviously have very ambitious targets for that at Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, even before there was the supply chain issues, Tesla demand exceeded production. So now its demand is exceeding production to a ridiculous degree. We're actually probably going to limit, or just stop taking orders for anything beyond a certain period of time, because some of the timing is like a year away. Anyway, the frustration that we're seeing from customers is being unable to get them a car, not are they willing or interested in buying a car. Basically, I think zero about demand generation and a lot about production and engineering and supply chain.
I have two more questions on Twitter, if I may, before we turn for the rest of the session to Tesla. How confident are you the deal will happen? And is there a risk, this is all one question, and is there a risk, because you're putting a lot of your personal stake up for this to fund it, is there a risk that if it all goes south, you're imperiling your stake in Tesla, potentially hurting Tesla financially and maybe even SpaceX, if it all goes to pot? That's the technical term.
Yeah, sure. I think there's still a lot of things that need to get done before this deal concludes. Obviously, there's not yet even been a shareholder vote. and Twitter has not yet filed the proxy for a shareholder vote. So there are still, some outstanding questions that need to be resolved, so it is certainly not a done deal. Just objectively, it is not a done deal. The best case scenario is that this would be, I think, perhaps done in 2 or 3 months. Yeah.
And the final question, and this is really the two-paid elephant in the room: are you planning to let Donald Trump back on?
Well, I think there's a general question of should Twitter have permanent bans? I've talked with Jack Dorsey about this, and he and I are of the same mind, which is that permanent bans should be extremely rare and really reserved for people where they're trying to, for accounts that are bots or spam scam accounts, where there's just no legitimacy to the account at all. I do think that it was not correct to ban Donald Trump. I think that was a mistake, because it alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. He is now going to be on Truth Social, as will a large part of the right in the United States, and so I think this could end up being, frankly, worse than having a single forum where everyone can debate. I guess the answer is that I would reverse the perma ban. Obviously, I don't own Twitter yet, so this is not like a thing that will definitely happen, because what if I don't own Twitter? But my opinion, and Jack Dorsey, I want to be clear, shares this opinion, is that we should not have perma bans. Now that doesn't mean that somebody gets to say whatever they want to say. If they say something that is illegal or otherwise, just destructive to the world, then that there should be perhaps a timeout, a temporary suspension, or that particular tweet should be made invisible or have very limited traction. But I think perma bans just fundamentally undermine trust in Twitter as a town square where everyone can voice their opinion. It was I think it was a morally bad decision, to be clear, and foolish in the extreme.
Even after he egged on the crowd who went to the US Capitol, some of them carrying nooses, you still think it was a mistake to remove him?
I think if there are tweets that are wrong, they should, and bad, those should be either deleted or made invisible. And a suspension, a temporary suspension is appropriate, but not a permanent ban.
So if the deal completes, he might potentially come back on, but with the understanding that if he does something similar again, he'll be back in the sin bin.
He has publicly stated that he will not be coming back to Twitter, and that he will only be on Truth Social. And this is the point that I'm trying to make, which is perhaps not getting across, is that banning Trump from Twitter didn't end Trump's voice. It will amplify it among the right. And this is why it is morally wrong and flat out stupid.
Okay, thank you. We will, let's turn to Tesla again. I'd like to ask you about your ambitions for the future. You've said you want the company to be able to make 20 million cars a year by 2030, which would make it the same size as Toyota and Volkswagen combined today. Give us a sense. What does the business look like by 2030 to make 20 million cars? Plants, footprints, models.
Yes, well, this is not a forum for announcing new product, new Tesla products. The 20 million by 2030 is an aspiration, not a promise. And the reason for aiming for something like that is there are approximately 2 billion cars and trucks in the world. And for us to really make a dent in sustainable energy and electrification, I think we need to replace at least 1% of the fleet per year to really be meaningful. And that's where the 20 million units comes from. Let's try to replace 1% of the global fleet of 2 billion cars and trucks per year. That's our aspiration. It's not a promise, it's an aspiration. I think we've got a good chance of getting there. And people will see, based on the products that we unveil, will be able to judge for themselves whether that goal is realistic or not.
Now, you've gone from 0 plants to 4 plants. That would require you to get to possibly about 20 plants, depending how they're ramped up. Is that phase more difficult, what you've got ahead of you by 2030, than what's gone behind, given you've already done it? Or do you still think it's more difficult to ramp to that level?
I think it's close. It's roughly, the sheer amount of stuff that Tesla's done is, I think, quite mind-boggling. We have an incredible team at Tesla and executing very well. And our annual growth rates are faster than any large manufactured product in the history of Earth. I think the next fastest was the growth of the Model T, and we're faster than the Model T. So, if that growth rate continues, then obviously we will reach 20 million vehicles a year. But we may stumble and not reach that goal. So, but I'd say it's roughly equally difficult to have gotten to this point as it will be to get to 20 million.
And what's the biggest uncertainty with getting to 2030? Is it manufacturing ramping? Is it the raw materials? Is it something else?
There are some raw material constraints that we see coming in lithium production, probably in about 3 years, and in cathode production. The two main cathode choices are nickel and iron phosphate. Obviously, iron is extremely plentiful. The Earth is 32% iron by composition. So, if a little bit of trivia, if someone says, "What is Earth made of?" The single biggest element that Earth is made of is iron. The second biggest element that Earth is made of is oxygen, which is about 30% of Earth mass. So clearly iron's not in short supply. The phosphate is slightly more of a challenge, but still quite common. So I do not see any fundamental scaling constraints. And lithium is also quite common. So lithium is practically everywhere. So this is not a question of a shortage of like, as though it's some rare element. It's really just that the lithium mining and especially the refining capacity and that of taking iron and phosphorus and turning it into battery grade iron phosphate or nickel and turning it into battery grade nickel it's really the equipment. I think the single biggest constraint would be the equipment necessary to convert the ore into battery grade materials. And we're working on that with suppliers. So I'm not saying that this is an impossible thing to address. It is simply one of the problems along the way to getting 20 million vehicles.
LFP batteries are much less recyclable than the other batteries you use. How much of that is an issue in terms of overall environmental impact of what the company does if you end up using lots and lots of them?
No, what you said is not true. Iron phosphate batteries are fully recyclable.
Good, well that's easy.
And so are nickel-based. I'm not sure where you're getting your information, but Iron phosphate is completely recyclable, and so is solar nickel-based batteries.
Thank you. I stand corrected. Can I ask why you think Tesla needs to grow so much by 2030? Because what you set out when in the early years was that you wanted Tesla to help tilt the world away from fossil fuels. And to some extent, it looks like it's already succeeded.
Yes, I think you're sort of putting too much emphasis on those 20 million vehicles by 2030, as though this is some grand promise, some hill upon which we will die. It is simply an aspiration, and we may achieve it or we may not. Our goal is to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, and so that's why we want to make a lot of cars and also a lot of stationary battery packs, because the three pillars of a sustainable energy future are electric transport, stationary battery packs, and solar and wind, and geothermal and hydro, basically sustainable energy sources. But solar and wind particularly are intermittent. And so you need stationary battery packs to store the energy when the sun doesn't shine. So you have constant electricity provision, or when the wind doesn't blow. So, but you can completely convert. I want to be very clear about this. All of Earth can easily be powered by solar and wind, stationary battery packs, and electric transport. Well, you could power several. Even if Earth's economy were to, you could do 10 times what Earth's economy is with solar, wind, batteries, and electric transport. It's not a close thing. I think most people just have not done the basic math of just how much energy hits the Earth from the sun. It's a kilowatt per square meter, or said another way, a gigawatt per square kilometer. So if you have a 20% efficient solar system, that's 200 megawatts per square kilometer. It's a lot, basically. You could power all of Europe with a section of Spain, a relatively unoccupied section of Spain. You could power all of the United States with a corner of Utah or Texas. Now, obviously, it would make more sense to spread this out and not, I'm just using this as a figure of speech, or to show that it is a small amount of area that is necessary to power the United States or Europe. It is not some vast area. And I invite anyone to do the basic math. It's not hard. 200 megawatts per square kilometer. Okay, so what's the power needed? That'll tell you how many square kilometers. Then you will need batteries to store that. I think our calculation of the amount of area of the batteries needed to store all the energy to power the United States was roughly 1 square mile. Literally.
So do you think Tesla has succeeded in its goal then? Or do you think there's still much more to do?
No, I think that we've not succeeded in the goal. If you consider the goal to be getting the automotive industry to move strongly towards electric vehicles, I think that part of the goal we have succeeded in. That was explicitly part of our goal, is to get the industry moving towards electric vehicles, because they were doing nothing in that direction when we started. And for the longest time, they were dismissing the concept of electric vehicles. And then Tesla started taking market share away from them, and that changed their mind.
How long do you think you're likely to stay at Tesla?
As long as I can be useful.
And what else is there in terms of potential future projects that piques your interest? You're obviously going to be quite involved in Twitter if the deal goes through, but you've got Tesla, you've got SpaceX, you've got Boring, you've got Neuralink. As you're looking around thinking you potentially have capacity, what else is there in terms of the kind of, betterment of the human condition or improving Earth that you feel you might want to turn your attention to in the future?
Well, I'm trying to take the set of actions that I think most likely make the future good, and hopefully not pave the road to hell with good intentions. So, so I think Tesla's about accelerating sustainable energy because we obviously need a sustainable energy future on Earth for Earth to be good. Then SpaceX is about extending life beyond Earth so that we may become a multi-planetary species. And with Starlink providing internet coverage to the least served in the world. Those that are into rural communities or places that just don't have good internet or it's very expensive. But I think it's important that we become a multi-planet species and a spacefaring civilization because eventually the sun will expand and destroy all life on Earth. So if one is a true environmentalist or cares about the future of life, it is obviously important that life become multiplanetary and ultimately multistellar. So we must make that first step.
What do you think the next goals are then for SpaceX? And do you have a date in mind for when you think they will get to Mars?
I think we should be able to, I don't know, maybe get Starship to Mars uncrewed in 3 to 5 years. And then I think if that's successful, then we may be able to send a crewed mission to Mars before the end of the decade. The windows for going to Mars occur every 2 years. So the planets align for a orbital transfer every 26 months. So that's you get a kick at the can every 26 months. So we're making a lot of progress with Starship. We will hopefully have our first launch attempt this summer, or basically next 2 or 3 months. And we're building up, we've got a factory for Starships. So there's a whole bunch of Starships coming behind the one that will attempt launch soon. So if that one doesn't work, we'll have many more behind that, and we're continuously improving the design. So each one is better than the last. And Starship really is a game changer to an extraordinary degree with respect to access to space, because it's the first orbital rocket that is designed to be fully and rapidly reusable. There's never been a fully reusable orbital rocket. Falcon 9 is the most reusable rocket since we're able to fairly rapidly reuse the boost stage and the fairing, and that's maybe 70% of the cost per mission is saved. But we still lose the upper stage on every mission. So with Starship, both the booster and the upper stage, both the ship and the booster will be recovered, and they'll be recovered very rapidly. And in theory, you could launch the booster, 10 or 12 times a day, and the ship, because of orbital limitations, maybe you could launch it 3 times a day. And it's also a very big vehicle, so on the order of roughly 100 tons of useful load to orbit. So it's Saturn V scale payload to orbit, but fully reusable. If it was expandable, it would probably do, 250 tons to orbit. And I think with further improvements, even with full reusability, we can probably get it to 150 tons to orbit. But to put this into perspective, if you have a fleet of Starships launching with the ability to launch every day or multiple times a day, Starship will do more than 1,000 times the payload to orbit of all other rockets on Earth combined.
Thank you, that was fascinating. Can I bring us down to earth gently and ask you about China in relation to Tesla?
Sure.
How important is the market for you? Do you think China contributes most of your growth in the future?
No, I think China is obviously a very significant market, but it is, I'd say it's probably 25 to 30% of our market long term. The rest of the world is probably 3/4 of it.
Do you see, I promised I didn't have any more Twitter questions, but this is sort of a Twitter question. Do you see any risk at all that China uses your ownership of Twitter potentially to interfere or block Tesla's operations in the country? Because obviously China has banned Twitter.
I've seen no indication to that effect.
Okay. How close would you say you are personally to the Chinese government? Because when you set up the factory in Shanghai, the rules were rewritten around joint ventures to allow you to do that.
Well, yeah, I was certainly asked many times by the government of China to do a factory in China. I said, well, we're not going to do one which is 51% locally owned. And so if they're willing to change the rules, not just for us, but for everyone, then we would move forward. And so they did. And I think it's been very successful so far, and the government's very happy about it. And so, I don't know, things are proceeding fairly well.
How many other plants are you expecting to open in China in the near future?
Well, we're not expecting to open any additional plants in China in the near future. We will be expanding our Shanghai factory. But our focus on production is going to be on the two new factories that we've recently completed in Berlin and in Austin, Texas. And getting those to high volume production is the near-term challenge.
We had Herbert Diess, Volkswagen chief executive, who you know well, at the summit yesterday. And we asked him what his big question was for you. And it was, how do you scale production in China, Germany, and Texas simultaneously? Because for any experienced OEM, even the ones with 100 years of doing this, that's a challenge.
Yes, I think generally the difficulty of manufacturing and scaling manufacturing is very much underappreciated. I've said many times that prototypes are easy, production is hard. And we can easily whip out a prototype of any kind of car you could possibly imagine with a small team in 6 months. Now, we have a team of 100 people in 6 months. Now, to bring that to fruition with high volume production is 10,000 people in 2 years, and that's 3 times faster than the rest of industry. So overwhelmingly, the problem with cars is production. Overwhelmingly, it's 99% of the difficulty. So he's certainly correct that the difficulty is scaling. But if you look at our track record thus far in scaling production, we've scaled production at, like I said, a rate faster than any car company on the history of Earth, or any company making a large, sophisticated product of any kind. So, provided we continue to execute at that rate, we'll do fine. And even if that rate slows down a little, it'll still be faster than any other company on Earth.
Now, I want to ask you about 2 specific rumors that have swirled around future production plants for you. Are you going to build a plant in Indonesia?
As I said, this is not the forum for us to make major company announcements.
And finally, have you looked at building a plant in the UK? Do you think you might ever build a plant in the UK in the future?
I refer back to my prior answer.
It was worth a try, right? Can I ask about autonomy, right? So you have this way that you think about autonomy using cameras on the vehicles, and you want to get to almost a kind of human level AI to get the cars to drive themselves fully in the real world. But a lot of people who work in AI think human level AI is a long, long, long way off. How do you square that circle about the approach that you're taking and the speed at which you want to deploy full self-driving technology?
Well, I don't think you need full human-level intelligence to drive a car. You need sufficient human-level intelligence to drive a car, but not you don't need like deep conceptual understanding of, esoteric concepts or anything like that. You need sufficient intelligence to match what human neural nets do when driving a car. And I think anyone who's driven a car for any length of time, once once you have some years of experience driving a car, the cognitive load on driving a car is not high. You're able to think about other things, listen to music, have a conversation, and still drive safely. So it's not like matching everything a human does, but it is still matching enough of the neural nets to what, to the silicon neural nets need to at least be on par with the biological neural nets to enable safe driving. And I think we're quite close to achieving that. But I recommend that, don't take my word for it, just sign up for our beta program and try it out. Or look at the videos that people are posting who are in our beta program. We have I think at this point, about 100,000 people in our beta program. So it's not exactly top secret.
How hard is it as a problem to solve? Because you've made predictions in the past about autonomy. Some of those haven't come to fruition at the same time. Has your understanding of the problem of autonomy changed over the last few years?
Yes. I'd say that self-driving is one of those things where there are a lot of false dawns, or where you think you're getting there, but then you end up asymptoting. Your progress is initially linear, and then looks logarithmic and sort of tapers off because you're in a local maximum that you did not realize you were in. Now, at this point, I think we are no longer trapped in a local maximum, and obviously I could be wrong, but I think we are actually quite close to achieving self-driving at a safety level that is better than human. And it appears, my best guess is that we will get there this year. But we're really not far from it. And like I said, the best way to assess this is to be in our beta program or look at the videos of those who are in the beta program and look at the progress that has occurred. And the progress is dramatic. And I'm confident we will not merely get to the safety level of a human, we will get far in excess of the safety level of a human. So I think ultimately probably a factor of 10 is safer than a human as measured by the probability of injury.
Given where you're trying to get to with this, the factor above human driving, the potential lives that could be saved with that, I need to ask you about some of the accidents and fatalities that have happened with vehicles previously. The people who died, do you consider that was a price worth paying to get to the level where we want to be to save more human lives in the future?
Well, it is important to note that, and we have never said ever that the Tesla Autopilot does not require attention. We have always made that extremely clear, repeatedly. You can't even turn it on without acknowledging that it requires supervision. We remind you of that every time you turn it on to ad nauseum. So this was not a case of setting expectations that the car could simply drive itself in the past and then not meeting those expectations. That is completely untrue. Now, it is also the case, however, and I knew this would be true from the beginning, that people don't, the people whose lives are saved with autopilot or autonomy don't know that their lives were saved. And so, if you look at, say, deaths, annual automotive deaths every year, it's about around 1 million people per year die from automotive accidents. Maybe 10 million per year are severely injured. And so with autonomy, the car's, driving, or it's assisted driving right now, but it will be fully autonomous in the future. Like I said, those who didn't realize they would have crashed or hit a pedestrian or cyclist. They don't know that. So basically, even if you let's say save 90% of the people that would otherwise have died, the remaining 10% who did die will still sue you. Now, but I think you have to say, like, in the grand scheme of things, what is the morally right decision? And I'm a strong believer in doing the reality of good over the perception of good. And I have utter contempt for those who prefer the perception of good over the reality of it. And so we're just going to take the heat. But if we believe that that the probability of injury is reduced, and we are very confident of that, but we also know that we're going to be sued despite doing the right thing, we will do the right thing and get sued.
Thank you. We have, it will not necessarily surprise you to hear, a lot of audience questions that have come in. In the last few minutes, I'm going to try and rattle through as many as we can. What is Tesla's approach to smaller and more affordable end of the market? You're going to go smaller than the Model 3, but could you get into a scooter, micromobility, something else?
Scooters are very dangerous. I would not recommend anyone drive a scooter. If there's ever an argument between a scooter and a car, the scooter will lose.
What about smaller than a Model 3? How far can you go down the entry level of the market?
Well, like I said, this is not some forum for roundabout product announcements, no matter how cleverly the question is asked. There's some probability that Tesla will do a smaller car than the Model 3, but I won't say more than that.
Okay, that's fine. That wasn't my question. That was an audience question. Does Tesla, would you ever consider licensing your platform to other OEMs? Presumably that would help switch the industry towards electric mobility, in your opinion.
Well, we've already open sourced all our patents. Anyone can use our patents for free. So, great. We only patent things in order to prevent others from creating this minefield of patents that inhibit progress with electric vehicles. But several years ago, I came to the conclusion we're never going to really prosecute anyone for using our patents. So let's just say you can use any Tesla patents for free. So I think hopefully that's helpful to others. But I think the regular car industry, the traditional car makers, will solve electrification. It's not fundamentally difficult at this point to make electric cars. The thing that I think they may be interested in licensing is Tesla Autopilot full self-driving. And I think that would save a lot of lives. But I think we still have, we have to prove ourselves for, I don't know, maybe another year or so. And then perhaps there will be some other car makers who may wish to license Tesla Autopilot. And we'd be very open to that.
Thank you. Of all the other EV startups, which one has impressed you the most?
Well, I think the company making the most progress besides Tesla is actually VW, which is not a startup, but could be viewed in some ways as a startup from an electric vehicle standpoint. So VW is doing the most on the electric vehicle front. I think there will be some very strong companies coming out of China. There's just a lot of super talented, hardworking people in China that are strongly believe in manufacturing, and they won't just be burning the midnight oil; they'll be burning the 3 a.m. oil. So they won't even leave the factory type of thing. Whereas in America, people are trying to avoid going to work at all.
We've got a question on the Cybertruck. Is there a risk that you lose the pickup segment to Ford, GM, and Rivian if you don't launch the Cybertruck or get it to market soon?
No.
Good. We've had another question come in.
We have more orders for the Cybertruck than we could possibly fulfill for 3 years after start of production.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question come in about China. You've been critical of lockdowns in the past, particularly when it happened in the US. Shanghai is currently locked down. Most of the Western world is able to carry on functioning at the moment because of vaccines, but China is going towards a zero COVID approach. What do you make of the Chinese government's actions?
Well, I've had some conversations with the Chinese government in recent days, and it's clear that the lockdowns are being lifted rapidly. So I would not expect this to be a significant issue in the coming weeks. In the past, where I was sort of upset with lockdowns is where those lockdowns differentially affected Tesla, but not others. So in the case of California and the Bay Area counties specifically, every other car factory in North America was allowed to start, but not Tesla, even though there was no basis for that. It was simply because we were located in Alameda County in California. But they had no rational, it was arbitrary and unfair, and that's the reason for why we're quite upset about kind of Tesla being singled out as the only car company in America that wasn't allowed to start, even though I think our healthcare practices are probably better than anyone else.
Thank you. We've had a question on software. At what point did you realize that software was going to be key to Tesla's success? And particularly as others are coming into software, how do you maintain leadership in it?
Well, Tesla is, I think, as much a software company as it is a hardware company. I personally wrote software for 20 years. So I have great respect and admiration for software engineering. I think it's incredibly important. And I think that's why Tesla's been able to recruit some of the world's best software engineers, is because we value software engineering so highly and do not regard it as an afterthought. Our Autopilot full self-driving AI team is incredibly talented and some of them are the smartest software engineers in the world. And I do not give compliments lightly. So we have an incredible team. We have the best real-world AI team in the world, the best real-world AI team that on Earth. And we're seeing more and more incredibly talented people join our team. So, and we're really not seeing anyone else being close to solving real-world AI. They may exist, but if so, they're being very subtle about it. And I periodically poll our team and say, like, do we know anyone who is doing this? Because we know who a lot of the top people are in AI and what they're doing, and we just don't see anyone else that we're aware of making any significant progress in real world AI apart from Tesla. So yeah, I am quite confident that we will not merely maintain our software lead, but increase it.
Thank you. We've had a question come in on the supercharger network. What are your thoughts about opening it to other motorists who don't drive Teslas? And doesn't that risk what is currently one of your great competitive advantages?
We've already opened Tesla superchargers to other electric cars in Europe, and we intend to roll that out worldwide. It's a little trickier in the US because we have a different connector than the rest of the industry, but we will be adding the rest of industry connectors as an option to superchargers in the US. So we're trying as best as possible to do the right thing for the advancement of electrification, even if that diminishes our competitive advantage.
Do you think you'll ever wrap all your various operations, Tesla, SpaceX, etc., under one umbrella group, or do you want to keep them separate for the time being?
I think they're sort of separate objectives with different shareholder bases, and I think that, I don't see a ton of merit in combining them. At times there are people, where we have some, say, very talented people who actually are willing to join, but they want to do things both at SpaceX and Tesla. So, for example, we've got one of the best advanced materials teams in the world. It might be the best, but it's certainly one of the best. And a lot of people on that team were willing to join, but only if they could work on both rockets and cars. And so it was like, great, let's do that. And so we can sort of share some of the ideas between rockets and cars, which are obviously not competitive. They're not different competitive segments. So like if you say, like, if somebody's a really incredible technologist, innovator, engineer, they want to work on interesting things. So the more interesting, sure, like money's, but like they could get money from, anyone would hire them for a lot of money. So then it's not a money thing. It's really just how interesting are the projects. And so there are just a few cases where we can recruit some of the smartest, engineers, scientists, technologists in the world, but they want to work on both rockets and cars. And there's a few cases like that.
Thank you. I know we've run over time, but it's one more I'm going to try and get in, and then if you need to go. But if you're happy to keep talking, we'll keep you. What do you think is the next big innovation in personal transportation?
Well, I think tunnels are underrated, underappreciated. Tunnels will never let you down, or will they?
Here's the question on tunnels, right? So if you look at, say, for instance, Robert Moses in New York built loads of highways. They were supposed to solve congestion, and all they did was led to more congestion. How do you avoid tunnels doing exactly the same, but just being very expensive in the process?
I have to say this notion of induced demand is one of the single dumbest notions I've ever heard in my entire life. If adding roads just increases traffic, why don't we delete them and decrease traffic? And I think you'd have an uproar if you did that. The real problem is that we have not. If you take, say, congested cities, which really almost all large cities are congested. You have a fundamental dimensional problem. You have, say, these tall buildings or multi-level buildings where you've got, people living in 3D, and then you want to take them in and out of those buildings on a 2D road network. Like, how would you possibly expect that to work? And especially if they want to all, arrive and depart at roughly the same time. This is just a recipe for traffic, obviously. So now if you go 3D, which you go 3D up or you go 3D down, now you're matching the dimensionality of the buildings. The buildings are 3D, and if the road network, or you could potentially have flying cars, is 3D, then you will completely alleviate the traffic problem. So think of tunnels not as a single layer of tunnels, but as many layers as you want, as whatever layer count is necessary to drop traffic to negligible levels. I think it's so obvious this will work, it boggles my mind that people wouldn't think it would work. And we have a proof of concept for this in Las Vegas with a tunnel going from the convention center to the Strip, and that will soon be connecting all of the hotels and the airport in Las Vegas, and people will just try it out for themselves. It's working really well already in Vegas. And there was some skepticism among the county and the city as to whether it would be effective. And I think the test tunnel just barely succeeded in a vote with the local government in Clark County and Las Vegas. But once they saw the initial test tunnel and rode in it themselves, we got a unanimous vote in favor of expanding it to the whole city. So that should tell you something.
Could you ever potentially go in the other direction, three-dimensionally, and look at VTOLs and potentially flying vehicles?
Well, I like the idea of VTOLs, but you know, we already have VTOLs in the form of a helicopter. So, but the problem with going 3D in the air is that you now have things that make a lot of noise, and the wind force that they generate when taking off or landing is very high. I mean, if you just say, like, look at a little drone and say, now imagine if that thing was big, what a racket it would make and how much wind force would it generate. And now they're going all over the place, like a giant beehive of super noisy bees. I don't think this is what people want. And most cities, helicopters are actually banned except for emergency purposes because of this reason. So then there's also the weather dependency. So if there are high winds or heavy snow, rain, sleet, now you can't fly. So that now you're shut down and can't go anywhere. Then there's the probability of something falling on your head is much higher if there are all these VTOLs flying all over the city. I mean, I think people's comfort level would be quite reduced. Should someone have perhaps not properly serviced their, flying car and it drops a wheel on your head. I know that I think would be discomforting to most people. And also having them fly over your backyard and having strangers stare at you all day is probably also discomforting. So I think these are all reasons why I think VTOLs will not succeed.
Perfect. Well, I deliberately avoided calling them flying cars because most of them don't drive on the road. But no, you're right. But apart from that, they're great. You told Kara Swisher in 2020 that if Tesla investors knew what you knew, they would panic about the state of the company. That was 2 years ago. So what were you referring to at the time?
I'm not sure what I was referring to at the time. 2020. I mean, I think it's not that Tesla investors should panic. It's just that the sheer number of problems being solved behind the scenes, I think, would blow their minds. And it's like that analogy of you see the duck serenely moving along the pond, but meanwhile the legs are paddling like crazy underneath. This is really what's happening pretty much all the time. So there are a nonstop series of issues that need to be solved with Tesla or with SpaceX, or really with most companies, I suspect. Now we do solve them, but I think it would be very scary to most people to realize just how many things have to get solved on a real-time basis for the company to function well. Just last night, I basically got no sleep. I was up on Sunday night I really just didn't get any sleep until last night,
So what is...
Just work. I was literally working all night, just Sunday through Monday.
What is paddling under the water at the moment? Is there something going on that makes you worry about the future of Tesla, or do you think the company is now completely secure?
No, I think the future of Tesla is extremely strong. So Tesla has no debt. It has a lot of cash, and there's a sort of a short-term hiccup with the COVID restrictions in Shanghai. But to the best of my knowledge, the future of Tesla is incredibly bright, and I think we will throw off a tremendous amount of free cash flow.
Do you think, with your cash and obviously your market cap at the moment, you would ever consider buying another car maker, whether an established OEM or a new business?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely, no.
Great. Finally, we've had a couple of questions come in on supercapacitors. Do you think they might be have potential as an alternative energy storage solution to lithium-ion batteries?
Well, it's interesting. Supercapacitors or ultracapacitors are, oddly enough, and I did research in that for a couple of years while doing my physics degree at a company in Silicon Valley called Pinnacle Research, which at the time at least made the highest energy density capacitors in the world. Now, they used a ruthenium tantalum alloy, which is very rare. Ruthenium especially is very rare. So that would not scale to high volume. There simply is not enough ruthenium. But I thought about the problem quite a lot, and in fact, my primary goal, had I continued as a graduate student and done a PhD at Stanford, would have been to try to figure out how to build ultra high energy density capacitors. And the sort of theory I had at the time was to use advanced chip making equipment to build solid state capacitors that would be accurate at the molecular level. There's a little bit of, not new physics, but exploring some areas of quantum mechanics, because you have to minimize the probability that electrons can sort of tunnel from essentially a tunnel across the insulator, from the conductor to the insulator. So things get quite complicated and rather weird at the sort of single, or when you get to a small number of atoms. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I think capacitors are not needed at all for electrification of the entire auto industry.
Thank you. We've had a question on mining.
I know what I'm talking about. So
I know that. Don't worry. We've had a question on mining. You've obviously done a number of mining deals trying to secure raw materials. Do you think you could ever go a step further and actually buy a mining company in the future?
It's not out of the question. We will address whatever the limitations are on accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. It's not that we wish to buy mining companies, but if that's the only way to accelerate the transition, then we will do that. There are no arbitrary limitations on what's needed to accelerate sustainable energy. We'll just tackle whatever set of things are needed to accelerate sustainable energy, and doing mining and refining or buying a mining company, provided we think we can change that mining company's trajectory significantly, are possibilities. Yeah.
This is a slightly personal one. Do you ever think your children could end up working at Tesla? Obviously not the new one, she's only a few months old, but the older ones.
Yeah. Well, my older children have said that they wish to do their own thing, which I support. That none of them has said that they wish to work at Tesla or at SpaceX. They want to do their own thing, and obviously I support them doing that. I think they want to do something for themselves and make their own way in the world, and that's fine. And it's possible at some point in the future that perhaps they do something of themselves and then decide that they'd like to do something at Tesla or SpaceX, and I'd support that too. But currently they want to do their own thing.
Perfect.
If I were to judge by little X, I know seeing a kid love rockets more than he does. It's next level. He likes it. I mean, it's really next level. So if his love of rockets continues from age 2 and to when he's older, then he may be interested. He will be interested in working on rockets.
Perfect. Thank you. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Excellent. Good. You talked earlier about things that are abundant in the world. Iron's abundant. Oxygen's abundant. Hydrogen's also very abundant in the universe.
In the universe, but not on Earth.
Not on Earth. Have you ever considered, do you think that it has a role to play if we really want to accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels?
No. And
there we go.
I really can't emphasize this enough. The number of times I've been asked about hydrogen, it might be like well over 100 times, maybe 200 times. It's important to understand that if you want a means of energy storage, hydrogen is a bad choice. It has extremely low energy density. It's extremely low density, and so it's actually its volumetric energy density is poor. Its gravimetric energy density is good, but that doesn't really matter because it's its overall density as an element. It's like even in liquid form, we're talking about something that's got the density of styrofoam. So you need gigantic tanks to hold hydrogen in liquid form, or a very powerful pressure vessel to hold it in gaseous form, in which case tanks even bigger. It is a deep cryogen, only liquid at close to absolute zero. So maintaining it in liquid form is incredibly difficult. It does not naturally occur on Earth. So you either have to split water with electrolysis or crack hydrocarbons. When you're cracking hydrocarbons, you really haven't solved the fossil fuel problem. And the efficiency of electrolysis is poor. So you really are spending a lot of energy to split hydrogen and oxygen. Then you have to separate the hydrogen and oxygen and pressurize it. And this also takes a lot of energy. And if you have to liquefy liquid hydrogen, oh my God, that's the amount of energy required to liquefy liquid to make hydrogen and turn it into liquid form is staggering. It is the most dumb thing that I could possibly imagine for energy storage. Final question. You once said you want to die on Mars, and then you stressed not on impact. Is that still your aim? The Mars bit, not the impact bit. No. I was asked, do I want to die on Mars? And I just said, sure, but not on impact. I think if you're going to die, obviously we'll die sometime. And if you're going to die anywhere, I suppose dying on Mars would be kind of cool to be born on Earth and die on Mars. It's not like I've got a goal of dying on Mars, but if you're there, like, where do you want to die? I'm like, oh, sure, Mars, I'll pick that one. But really, the goal on the Mars front is making life multiplanetary so as to extend the probable lifespan of civilization and to preserve life as we know it. So not just humans, but also the other animals and plants. We don't want to end up like the dinosaurs. And there will be some set of natural calamities that occur on Earth. Giant meteors and stuff, and super volcanoes, and who knows what. And we could also do ourselves in with a sort of World War III, which is maybe looking a little bit more probable these days. So I think it's important for preserving the light of consciousness that we become a multi-planet species and ultimately a multi-stellar species.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for Elon Musk. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.